Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. Sean, I'm excited for today's episode. We have an epic guest on, Marcus Sawyer, and he is a powerhouse, someone who is truly shaping the future of HR tech, talent acquisition, and community-driven hiring. So a little bit about Marcus. And Sean, I want to hear from you. Marcus Sawyer is a visionary leader, entrepreneur with a deep background in digital transformation and workforce solutions. And he is the co-founder at EQ App, which we'll learn about a little bit later in the episode. But Marcus has a tremendous and phenomenal career spanning across industry giants like Adecco Group, where actually both of us were colleagues with Marcus at one point. But Marcus has a track record of innovation in recruitment and has a unique perspective on HR tech, AI, and the future of work and where we're headed. So Marcus, welcome to Thoroughly Thriving. We're excited to dive into your journey and hear your insights on the evolution of talent acquisition and the power of community hiring. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me, Darren, and looking forward to having a conversation with you and Sean.
Yeah, we're pumped. Sean, any initial thoughts before we get into some of the meat of the podcast?
I'm really looking forward to today's episode, Darren. I think that, it brings together a convergence of so many different ideas, so many things that are important to our audience, but also just an audience globally as a whole. And I think the work that Marcus and his team are doing is really transformational in a lot of ways. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Well, selfishly, I want to kick things off, pun intended, with the first question, Marcus. Two things that are dear to my heart, besides my family, is certainly the industry of human capital solutions, but also soccer and football, as better known around the world. And from doing our due diligence and knowing you a bit, I know you've had your stint as a footballer. But from professional soccer to HR tech leadership, your journey from playing professional soccer to becoming a leader in HR technology has certainly been remarkable. Marcus, can you share with our audience, how did your experiences in sports really influence your approach to leadership and innovation in the HR tech sector?
Yeah, so it's certainly been a journey. I would say that just to give a little bit of context, I'd spent the majority of my childhood playing some kind of sport. My dad was an Olympian, and he was in the Olympics for Taekwondo. He was the coach for England as well. And I actually had a decision that I had to make as a kid. And there was one evening where Taekwondo and football was on the same night. And my dad said, "Hey, what are you thinking about doing?" And I hadn't actually had the conversation with him. And my mum said to me, "You're going to have to tell your dad that you want to play football." So I remember this very, very clearly. And I was trying to have this difficult discussion with my dad, who's obviously European champion 3 times, Olympian. I've been in tournaments, I won a few. And I was like, I want to play football. And he looked at me, he paused. He's like, "You can do both." So I ended up in the same evening going from football to Taekwondo, and it just happened that they were across the road from each other. So I was very much on the individual sports to start, right? And it was all about survival in martial arts. And I got into athletics as well. I used to run track, and I was pretty fast, and it was more individual side. And then I decided to move over into team sports, which was really where football came. And I actually started playing football pretty late, considering. So I started about 11 or 12. And a lot of folks, especially in England, start when they're 6 or 7. But I knew I wanted to play in a professional team. So I managed to get into a professional team by the time I was 14. And I played for Brentford. And yeah, it was really fun, a good journey. But I had some great people around me. A lot of my friends at school, as I got into high school, some of them made it into the Premier League. Some of them played for a long time. Some of them went down completely different paths, which is paths that we could have all taken. But I learned a lot. I think retrospectively, looking back on it, obviously, you see what you learn when you're in business, not at the time, right? And I think if I hadn't have played a team sport and I'd continued down an individual track, maybe I might not have thought in the same way about leadership and leading teams. And look, I was actually probably a better individual contributor than leader at the start, and then evolved into leadership. And you know how it is if you're doing really, really well in sales, which is kind of another thing we can talk about. Then you get thrown into this leadership track, and you expect everybody to do what you can do, and that's probably not the best way to hire a leader as well.
What a journey, just from starting at 11 to 14. And I appreciate the fact that you said you had good people around you. You know, I know just having a business partner like Sean, I can look back to people in my career, both in athletics, because I share the same type of story, Marcus, where athletics was a big part of my career now. I can see there's indelible marks that have been left, but it comes down to the people that believed in me, you know, when I didn't see it myself. And to be able to pass that along and really dig the gold out of people has been paramount because gold isn't often found on the surface of the earth, right? We have to dig those things out of people. So it sounds like that's exactly what happened to you and really facilitated to a journey that was exponentially expedited for you. So that's tremendous.
And I love what you said about the journey of sales into leadership. Like I think it's, in a sports parallel, you often don't see the star player become the generational coach later, right? You end up there are rare exceptions, but oftentimes you see the coach was a good player or a consistent player or had tons of intelligence around what they were doing, but didn't necessarily always have the highest level of skill to be able to execute on that. I think there's a lot more parallels. We could probably dive into that, but let's talk a little bit about your journey from moving into the space we're in now to now launching this, EQ marketplace, EQ.app. It's an incredible organization that you've built. Tell us a little bit about, what inspired you to start this organization.
So yeah, again, I think being in kind of fast forward in a few years. So after playing football, I decided to get a job in the gym. So a lot of my life has been about evolutions, and I thought I was going to get a job in helping people work out, staying fit, so I can continue playing football, which I did. I played semi-professional, but they didn't have any of those types of jobs, so I went into sales, and I was going out and trying to convince people to join LA Fitness, which was the gym in London, by the way. So the name's called LA Fitness, and it was in this alleyway in a Muse, and a lot of the time it'd be raining, and you'd have to go out and get people in the gym. And my thought was like, why am I trying to get one person in each time? And if you came into that gym, you were not leaving without a membership. Like that was like my one thing. You were going to get fit. And so then I started speaking to more people, and there was kind of this opportunity of doing corporate gym memberships, which I came up with. It was like, oh, you want a membership as an individual? How about we get your whole team and you get a better deal? So I started to kind of think through that. And then at the time, and I'm kind of giving you a bit of backstory in terms of how I got there, but at the time, I thought to myself, well, if I can do this, maybe there's other jobs and there's other opportunities there. So I started to look on an online job board, one of the first at the time, which was careerbuilder.com. And Career Builder was really in kind of the space of convincing people to stop advertising in newspapers and advertise on this thing called the internet. So that was like my first evolution into online staffing and recruiting. And I ended up staying there for 10 years. I left after 5 years and set up a business and then went back. And then when I came back, the business had evolved a lot. So we were then selling software. We were then setting up staffing and recruiting kind of businesses inside. We had something called Source Curating Intro, which I was involved in, and then got closer to the staffing and recruiting division. And so fast forward, after being at Adecco, leading digital transformation for a Fortune 500 company, I felt that there was a gap in the market. And the gap was to start with a community first. So start with a talent first, build out that community. And so EQ Community was born. We're in our fourth year now. But on the back end, based on what I learned around technology, it was about how can you leverage what you know about people to connect with people on the community side, but on the back end, the delivery side, automate and leverage as much technology and AI as possible to make that streamline. So we started as a permanent placement recruiting company. But the ethos, just to give you kind of back, and I can go into a bit more detail in a sec, but the ethos was really kind of three things. And my son, and I was talking to him earlier, he was the one that inspired me to start. I was driving him to nursery. He's like, Daddy, why don't you just start your own business? And I will correct the intro. So I'm the founder. So I started it on my own and brought people in. And he said, why do you not start your own business? I said, why? And he said, well, you're, and I don't like this word, but he said, you're a good boss of us. And I think you could run your own business. But I said, but son, I'm like CEO of this like company inside of it. He said, no, your own business. He was 4. So I went out, drew a few circles. What are you good at? Where's the market? Where's your passion and opportunity, and where that intersects in those concentric circles? I said, right, I'm going to start EQ. And I'd moved to the US and just went on a few runs and took the leap of faith and done it.
Wow. Darren, that's incredible.
Yeah, very inspiring. Oftentimes, Sean has 3 young kids. I have a couple of young kids, and when they share their thoughts, very matter of fact, um, it often resonates with me, Marcus. And there's been ideas where they just see things very, very plainly, and they see the forest through the trees. And so I really have grown to like perk my ears up when they have suggestions. So that's an amazing story about your son. Um, Marcus, given the future of talent acquisition, with advancements in AI and how you've been intimately involved with digital transformation and automation, how do you see HR technology evolving to better connect companies with top tier talent?
So I think if you have a staffing and recruiting firm, or you have a what I call like a industrial strength scale RPO or business internally, they're usually like 3 stools that you're looking at, or 3 legs to the stool, should I say? And one is candidates, right? You want to make sure your candidates are taken care of, and that's about personalizing the relationship and connecting with them. The other is really your colleagues, so those that are interacting, making sure that their morale's high, they feel like they're part of something that's special, and they have the tools that they need in order to be productive. And then the other thing is your clients, which could be your stakeholders and so on and so forth. And I think just thinking about it in that way, the technology comes in to solve any problems or opportunities that you have with those 3. It's not about technology first. It's really about the relationships and the business first. And I think with any business, and let's take recruiting, if you're doing it internally or externally, there's 2 real functions of a business. You want to obtain, get customers, and you want to keep them happy. And that's it. And so I think there's a lot of complexity in the space at the moment, and it's really about making it more consumable for both you internally and externally. So I think that there's a huge evolution, and as I use that word, and somebody, so it's kind of like I don't make knee jolt decisions. That's just not who I am, right? So everything that you might see or hear, whether it's like how do you go from playing football to being a Fortune 500 executive, there's a thought process through that. And the thought process is how can you leverage your core principles in another environment? And I think it's the same thing with technology. It's not using tech for tech's sake. It's what problem are you trying to solve? And I'm always trying to solve a problem and progress and move forward. So based on that, if you do that exponentially and you do that at a pace that others can't keep up with, you're going to be ahead. So that's really how I think about technology. How can you use it to move you ahead based on the agenda that you already have? But it has to start with what you're trying to achieve, what the purpose is.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard the adage, keeping the main thing. And being in this industry, in this marketplace for over 20 years, those things have been the golden thread. It's been the common denominator. It's curating and taking care of your candidates and clients in a very high touch, comprehensive manner, and then bolting on those things to enhance those relationships. So I completely concur with you. It's not focusing on that, but how can we optimize those relationships and leverage HR tech and technology overall. We there's something that the groups that I'm fortunate to be a part of, we talk about our net worth is directly correlated to our network. And how do we take care of our network? I think that's super important. And I know that's been on the forefront for you and your mission. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think just a kind of mental model. You want to think about principles versus products. So, what are your principles, and then how do they align? And I have this framework, kind of 10 P's. I actually got the 4 P's at Adecco, and I brought that out to the 10 P's. And it starts with purpose. So, what are you trying to do? And then you can go into the problem that you're trying to solve. And then once you've got that, who are your prospects, who are your partners? And it's really thinking in a way that allows, so you create, and it's like sports, right? And this is why I love sports, because there's, it makes it easier for you to compete in a finite environment. When it's infinite, it's more difficult and ambiguous, and it's hard for people to rally around it. So everything that seems like it's infinite, you have to bring it back to say, okay, well, what am I actually trying to do? And you create that structure and that framework around that. And then once you do that, that then allows you to operate in that environment until you feel like you've won. And I've got this really weird relationship with competition, obviously being in sports and blah, blah, but I really don't believe in it. I really think that you're only competing against yourself. And I think that if you have that mindset, you can go a lot further than you believe is possible, and also than others believe. And there's one final thing I would say as well at the start, was like, there was good people around me. They didn't necessarily believe, but I didn't need them to believe. And so I think it's also like watching what others do and seeing how, versus what they say, right? And I think that's something to really, really kind of take on board. Like, how are people operating in a certain environment when things hit the fan? What do they do?
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, I love what you said about the finite versus the infinite environment. I think when I think about digital transformation and you think about emerging technologies and recruitment and talent management, one of the things I hear all the time is, oh no, is technology gonna, get rid of recruitment and the future of recruitment? And, is it gonna get rid of recruiters? And I think people can get caught up in, as you mentioned, kind of this infinite environment where it just there doesn't feel like there's an end to it, so you feel like you almost lose your sense of space and being because you don't know what the future holds and all of those sorts of things. And I think that's great how you put it. How do you see emerging technology really reshaping the future in recruitment, from a more tangible finite environment, things people can put their hands to? But what do you see that future looking like in the near term?
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of two ends of the spectrum, right? And if you think of a sandwich approach and going in the middle, you've got what I would consider native or default, let's say AI companies that build with AI and start from scratch. And then you've got more of the traditional companies. And we've seen this play out in other industries historically. It's going to be a meeting in the middle at some point. Okay. And the reason being, you're going to have those that are heavy, heavy on relationships and those that are heavy, heavy on tech. But without the combination of the two, it's going to make it challenging for you to be in a people-based business. So I see that the future really looks at like a combination that is leveraged, and digital businesses are the same. You see companies like I was on a board at Microsoft Services for 4 years, right? And to my surprise, there was a big focus on the services side of the business, which is what I was on the board of, and that was to push the product side. And then you see it on the other side where you've got these services that are trying to become more tech enabled. So I think that the future is about working back from the goal. So again, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you reverse engineer that to get to the goal. So I think you're going to have some companies that leapfrog a few steps. Like, why are we doing this step again? Like, I'm hearing at the moment, why are we using resumes? I was speaking to somebody recently. They basically just doing their first level interviews and screening on voice only. And the reason being, and it might sound surprising, but it's like, well, if you see a resume that you like, what's the next thing you normally do? You jump on the phone. So why do you need the resume step, right? Or if you could hear somebody's voice and then you check at the resume and see if it makes sense. So just different things like that, a different way of thinking it. So I think that the sequencing will evolve. And I think companies that will be successful will understand how to apply the right sequencing to the right industry and the right sector and the right segment based on the customer's needs. So again, going back to what the customer wants and how they want to get. Do you want the cow or do you want the burger? Depends on if you're wholesale or retail, right? So I think it's about how you fit. And we see that in staff and recruiting, and especially with what you're all doing at the Thorough Group as well, being very specific and very niche allows you to get critical mass in an area, build roots, you spread out, and then you can evolve. So I think coupling technology with the right approach and strategy is really, really the opportunity.
Yeah. We here at Thorough Group, just to kind of validate what you're saying a little bit further, Marcus, we subscribe to the thought process of structure follows strategy. First we have the strategy, and then we develop the structure. It's almost like what you said, keeping the end in sight and then reverse engineering it from there. And so that's important for us, right? And we revisit that on a quarterly basis to ensure that the strategy is following, the structure is following the strategy, as I mentioned. I know our listeners, just given your background, we're going to want to know about some of the data points that you focus on when consulting with the plethora of companies that you support. And what I mean by that is metrics, right? we're I've been in sales organizations, large, smaller ones, and as I think about in today's world, in today's data-driven world, Marcus, what are key metrics or insights that companies should track to ensure they are hiring, retaining, and developing diverse talent effectively, or talent overall?
So I'll start with the hiring because I think it's different from the retention piece. And the hiring, the only metric, and then there's derivatives of it, but there's one, and it's time. That's it. And when you get into the detail of that, well, what do you mean by time, right? Like, because time to hire, we've heard that, right? But you also want time to quality hire, time that you're saving in the process for your clients, right? Getting back and forth. So it's all about saving time because time is the only resource that we don't get back. And if you understand that, you can bottle up time, then you've got more value to share with the rest of your ecosystem. Also, if you think about staffing and recruiting, typically, especially not necessarily always in permanent placement, but it's sold on time, right? Hours, time. We trade our time for what we call money. So give me some time, give me some money. So time is really the only one. But how do you tie that time back to a business objective? Now, I think one of the how do you know that you're getting there? And you can reduce time by reducing steps. So we're always looking at how we take out steps out of the process that are unnecessary. Can you leapfrog? So I think spending time to understand that. And like you said about the strategy piece, which I subscribe to, sometimes you have to do a certain amount of deep work to invest that time to save up front. Because what you don't want to do is build on a shaky ground. Because once you build on a shaky ground, especially with AI, it multiplies. So that's really how I think about the hiring piece. As far as retention, depends on what side we look at it, but it's performance. How do you then tie the ability or predict the ability for those folks to perform? And if people are performing, like we know in sports, and they're doing well, they're going to want to stay at the club, at the company. They're going to want to stay there if they're performing. And if they're compensated fairly, they're respected for their work. Those are really some of the things that we look at. So in order to predict that, you've got to predict And I was speaking to someone that you know who I connected with the other day, who's his chief medical officer, and we were talking about teams. And he was saying when he hires, he's not hiring for an individual; he's hiring for the fit for the team, because there's sometimes you can augment the rest of the folks there. So what's the fit for team? How are they going to perform in a team environment? So performance and time.
Man, I got a lot of things to think about there in terms of just, and I love what you said about the time piece. I think that that's one of the things when we talk to a lot of our clients, it's, thinking through, why have we always done it this way? What's the measurable? And even, asking the bigger picture questions to your point around the team piece. I love what you said about how they fit on the team. So often we just do process because we've always done it that way, rather than evaluating, the value of each step. Because to your point, time is valuable and how quick you get not just a hire, but a quality hire, because the amount of time it takes you to replace a non-quality hire lengthens that stream out also, and it becomes much, much more even to think about it. We work with a lot of entrepreneurial companies that are, really stepping out and working. We're actually working with a pretty exciting, venture capital firm right now, in some entrepreneurial activities that they're building, what they're doing. And, they're always looking to, to innovate and to come up with new and creative ways to move forward, but also even, other audience members I know for our podcast, there's other entrepreneurs that have, recruitment firms and HR type of activities that they're involved with, drawing from, you've got a diverse path of fitness, career builder, professional sports, and, into, all of these other companies that you've led, as well as being on the board, Microsoft, what maybe key advice would you offer for those who are really looking to innovate within, their space? Is there any keys that have helped you to continually, innovate and be on the forefront of the companies you're leading, the organizations that you're helping to grow with?
Yeah, I think it's all about collecting problems and not products. So you want to understand what you're trying to solve for, and think about the constraints that you can solve for that in a very resourceful manner. And if you want a framework, think about, it's a kind of traditional thing. Do we buy, build, or partner? And inside of your organization, when you're starting to deliver or implement that, who can you bring along the journey to champion that, to drive adoption? Because adoption has been a little bit challenging. And there's two ways to think about that in the space of AI that I see. You've kind of got what you see as co-pilots, and then we have the agents, which are autopilots. How can you bring as many of the autopilots in to work behind the scenes in the background? That's really where we're spending our time with our agent marketplace. So I really think it's about understanding, again, what you're trying to achieve, but being open to how you achieve it. So forget, like, are you going to be using a hammer, or are you going to use another type of tool to get to the same outcome? Are you going to use something that is brand new, or do you just want the nail? I heard this about Black and Decker, right? Somebody said this to me years ago. I think it was a Harvard Business Review study, and it was like, well, what does Black and Decker sell? Do you guys know what Black and Decker sells?
Tools, I believe. Yeah.
Holes. Right? Like, so and why did I love these, like, business questions. I'll ask you guys again. So why did we not see the rail companies be at the forefront of space, or be at the forefront of airplanes?
I don't know. Just they're just focused. They're focused on their track. I don't. Yeah.
They didn't realize what business they were in, which is the transportation business, right? So it's like, how do you get from A to B, and or the end result? Maybe instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, like, what's the end result, right? And so if the end result is to, and this is why you see certain people innovating a lot in areas that seem weird, but they're actually really linked, because there's not much difference between an electric vehicle and going to space in terms of the end result. which is travel and transportation, and that allows you to learn things and then use it. So I would just say do that in your business as you start to think through, really understand what business you're in.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's powerful.
Marcus, we've touched on your extensive background in digital transformation. I know our viewers, our listeners, will be really interested in understanding what's on the horizon. Um, in other words, how do you see emerging technologies reshaping the future of recruitment and talent management?
Yeah, I think it's going to be embedded into everything that we do. And our bet is that there's a lot that happens on autopilot. And we see it, we don't really, as I say, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So we don't have to look too far to say, okay, if we look at some of the consumer-based technologies that we use, whether it's I don't know, Netflix, or it's Amazon, or it's Uber, and we've been talking about it for a long time, but it's been really hard to produce that kind of level of service in our industry. And I think we're going to start to see kind of more of that recommendations that are accurate. I always say to people, like, if you want to learn who someone is, go and have a look at their YouTube and log in and see what their recommendations are, because that really tells you who they are, right? Because YouTube's super accurate, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that in our space, coupled with the information that you have that is somewhat qualitative, and you bring that in, and you take that qualitative data and you mix it with the quantitative pieces, and then that allows you to get the recommendation. So I think matching will improve a lot in our industry. I think that the speed of evaluating, so screening, but then you've got the flip side of it where you've got the candidate piece, and some have described it as an arms race because they are also obtaining a lot of this new technology as well.
Yeah.
And so as they do that, and you press one button and you kind of apply for a lot of jobs. So I think the challenge and the opportunity is being able to kind of walk through what I say are the areas that get you to wisdom. So you've got to look at data, take that data, which was, we remember we had the big data and it got lost. It was like big data, and that was like 10, 15 years. And then you went to information. And this is when Google it's really been at the forefront. But then from information, it's like, oh, that's still too much. You wanted insights. Okay. Once you've got these insights, these are key pieces that you can make decisions on. And then knowledge, like, how do you actually do this? How do you apply? So knowledge is applied, right? And then from that knowledge, then going into generating wisdom. So the promise of AGI and artificial intelligence is that you're going to have this wise thing that is helping you recruit. I think we're a little bit far from that from each industry discipline. But what I do think is that there's an opportunity to be a lot more knowledgeable before you enter discussions, conversations, negotiations as well. And that should speed up the time to hire, because you're not leaving that right to the end to say, okay, well, I didn't realize that this candidate wanted to do this, this, and this, because I didn't have that knowledge ahead of time. And that's why a lot of candidates drop out, right?
Awesome. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Sean, I don't know about you, but I'm drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to go back and listen to this one a couple of times, I think.
Wow. Well, Sean, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts for Marcus before we conclude the episode.
No, I'm chewing on a lot of information right now.
Yeah, yeah. This is great.
Well. Also, what you guys are doing is excellent as well, and I just want to kind of say hat off, because we've had various discussions offline as well. And building a business isn't easy, and you've managed to do that in a very difficult and challenging sector where care and being thorough is super important. So shout out to you two as well, and appreciate you having me, and just sharing some of the things that I've learned along the journey.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you. It's been great getting to understand the mission and the passion that you have for EQ. And Marcus, when I think about you, I think about a convergence. Sean used that word a little bit earlier in the episode, but I see convergence where passion meets purpose. And what I mean by that is if I look at this very, very, for me, objectively, purpose is kind of an outflow of the things that I give to my profession, to my family, to any other sphere of influence that I've been called to. And passion is the inflow of that. And so when I hear you talk, our offline meetings, I see convergence where passion meets purpose. And so it's very infectious in a very good way. So if there's anything that we can do at Thorough Group to help further your mission and extend the passion and purpose that you have, we're on board to help you and the team at EQ any way possible. But it has been a real pleasure to have Marcus Sawyer on Thoroughly Thriving. Again, he's the founder and CEO of EQ app. And so we couldn't be more excited. And Marcus, we end our each episode, by our ethos, by our mantra, by our battle cry, and that is we're only able to really stand working as one and winning as one. So thank you once again. We'll have another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.